we move on to the second session, in which we have Jane Duncan speaking, and Gary Strong and Peter Wilkinson. Jane Duncan is a past president of the RIBA, and in this context a particularly important one because it was on Jane's watch that the Grenfell tragedy occurred. And I know from having talked with her in the past that she was off the mark extremely swiftly, and I think the following day set up a special commission or group within the RIBA, both to review this entire subject matter, but also to assist whatever inquiries were going to be set up. And it was, of course, Sir Martin Moore-Bick's inquiry. But she was off the mark very quickly with that group, and I think it continued to operate for two and a half years or more. But she'll tell us a little bit about that, no doubt. We also have Gary Strong, Global Building Standards Director and Fire Safety Lead at the RICS. And he's got an incredible responsibility for developing international standards and guidance for the RICS, which of course is an enormous global institute with 135,000 professionals registered there. A regular panelist on TV and radio shows as well. And finally, we've got Peter Wilkinson, trustee at the Institution of Fire Engineers. So we're in the thick of it there. He's a chartered engineer and a chartered scientist and a registered fire risk assessor. So that will be another dimension to these conversations. He chairs, Peter chairs, the British Standards Technical Committee, developing and codifying free safety engineering practices. The way we're going to run this session is that each are going to present for 5 minutes. Then we're going to have a panel discussion where I'll prompt further debate, and then at the end of that session, I'll pick up questions that have been coming in from you, the delegates, again. So keep those rolling. Welcome then to Jane, Gary, and Peter.
Good morning. I think I'm to go first. So I'm Jane Duncan, and in fact, I'm still running the expert group on fire safety at the RIBA, which doesn't seem to have quietened down at all in the last 5 years. And if anything, I can see things getting more and more important for our role for the membership and perhaps even the wider community. But the point here that we're talking about is collaboration. And for me, collaboration is something that is natural for architects. Architects are natural collaborators. We talk through everything. I've also been extremely impressed with the amount of work that I've seen other professional institutes, not least of which, of course, RICS, and many other professional bodies who have come together many times, individually, in groups, on panels, at conferences, to talk about the way that their collaboration can increase the effectiveness and the competence of our various organizations and members. Having gone through that, I think my concern is still that the entire industry is not just made up of professionals. We are part of that industry, and the industry includes, obviously, contractors, suppliers, specialists, but in particular, I think, the one key person that is a duty holder but hasn't really taken the lead in any of these discussions so far are the clients. And I think that one of the key issues here is that the client has to step up. They have a huge responsibility under the new Act, and it's not just making sure that they have a competent team. I think the clients themselves need to understand their role, understand where their team is heading, and be able to give them a very good brief to follow. I think that if you're not an experienced client, and many of course are, you also need to consider very early on what your procurement route is and bring the team together so that there is true collaboration. There is still some adversarial ongoings. I know in just from various comments that we've had on the group, what happens at a certain stage, and which would, in this case, would probably be your gateway 2, and how how issues have arisen during the course of the work, particularly on D&P contracts. So if we're going to do that, I think we need to get together as professionals with our clients and with contractors and suppliers. And not least, of course, is we need to talk at length to the regulator to see how this is going to work. And if we can use the methodology of the golden thread to make sure that everybody has the information, at least we've got something to talk about when we do get together to collaborate. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you. On to Gary.
Shall I go next? Right, okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for inviting me along. So it's Gary Strong from the RICS, and we are talking about collaboration this morning, and just to build on what Jane was saying, I think the Grenfell Tower fire has undoubtedly been a huge shock to the built environment, but not only in the UK, but also outside the UK. And a lot of my work is overseas and international committees, etc. And a lot of other countries are watching very, very carefully what we're doing in the UK. So the outcome of all the changes that are taking place, the Building Safety Act changes in particular that the first two speakers were talking about, I think is going to have a big influence on other countries as well, because they don't want to be in the same position as we found ourselves in with that terrible tragedy. 40 years plus in the construction industry, I would say that the collaboration that's taken place over the past 5 years plus has been enormous, actually. And probably many delegates on this conference today would not appreciate the thousands of hours that have been put in, not only by members of staff of the professional institutes like myself, but also from volunteer members working through the Construction Industry Council, the Construction Leadership Council, the Competency Steering Group, for example, that was set up 4 years ago, which has got something like 12 different work groups working through the competency that are required of all actors in the built environment. The British Standards Committees, not to forget those at all. The various PASs, 8670, which is now the BSI 8670, and the Flex, the 8671, 72, and 73 series, and also the PAS 980 for external wall assessments has taken up a lot of time, a lot of really willing volunteers' time, actually, that are prepared to put their time and effort into this. And also with organisations such as the Government Home Office, DLUC, as they're now called, what was DCLG at the time, HSE now, coming into the fore as they step up the Building Safety Regulator. Dame Judith, with her committee, there were 6 work groups that fed into her initial report. The interim report and then the final report published in May 2018. And probably a lot of you won't appreciate the huge amount of effort that was put into that behind the scenes with the DCLG facilitated meetings to come up with what were the final recommendations. And now Dame Judith obviously chairs the ISSSG, the Industry Safety Steering Group, which many of us go to quite regularly. But you've also got organisations like the London Fire Brigade as well, the GLA, who have all been very, very collaborative and cooperative in terms of trying to make sure that this never ever happens again. On the social housing sector, a lot of housing associations have still got a long way to go. I would say personally that in the housing association market, they realise that they've got to address building safety and fire safety in particular, and you'll see lots of the comments around individual housing associations, such as the Guinness Housing Association £160 million framework they just recently announced, and also the developers. The developers were probably initially slow to come to the table around remediation, but of course they've all 49 of them have signed this government pledge to get on with remediation, and have realised their responsibilities at the construction stage are really, really important, and they should all now be very, very much aware of how this hits their bottom line once they start getting exposed. The other issue, of course, is professional indemnity insurance, and we've all struggled with that, the hardening of the market, particularly over the past 5 years, how insurers were not appreciative of what combustible cladding meant. We spent a long, long time working with them, and meetings still continue to try and unravel professional indemnity insurance to make it easier for people. It's good that the government have launched the EWS1 PII scheme, launched in September, it's just now getting going. And that took 2 years of hard work, actually, with DLUC and the Treasury to launch that quite small intervention, really, in the overall scheme of things. And we're starting to see now the green shoots of a bit of a softening around some of the professional indemnity insurance market as well. But it is hard work, and I think we've still got a long way to go to convince the professional indemnity insurers about what it is that what competency means in the industry, what regulations really mean, the change that are coming forward that the first two speakers spoke about. We also launched, actually, and with my two fellow speakers here today, with the RIBA and with the IFE, the International Fire Safety Standards Coalition. That was born directly out of the Grenfell Tower fire, and we launched it at the UN in Geneva in July 2018. It's now a collaboration of international bodies like us from around the world, and comprises over 100 bodies, actually, that launched the first UN International Fire Safety Standards that were adopted in October 2020, and now the new Decade of Action for Fire Safety 2022 to 2032, which has just been launched and endorsed by the UN. So there's been a lot of work, actually, a lot of work internationally, trying to ensure that we bring in the expertise from outside of the UK to contribute to where we are now. But I'd say we've still got a long way to go, hence the reason for the
Gary,
Decade of Action launch. Okay, thanks very much. I'll stop there.
Let's hear briefly from Peter, and then we'll open up the panel discussion properly. But Peter, your brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jane and Gary. I think it's worth starting off by stating that generally speaking, from a fire engineering profession's perspective, safety seemed to be a bit of a grudge purchase with a lot of projects before the Grenfell Tower tragedy. In lots of situations, fire engineer input was sought at a very late stage in the design process, often to address a discrete issue only. Really, we were rarely engaged during the construction phase or beyond. And whilst there were plenty of exam practice, the norm that I've just described was far from an ideal situation. But in a post-Grenfell environment, the demand for fire safety input is greater than ever. And whilst us fire engineers all like to secretly think that we are the only true guardians of fire safety know-how, and that our institution is the only meaningful fire-related professional body in the sector, in this post-Grenfell environment, it's crystal clear that fire safety is important to a wide range of professionals working across the built environment. We've had to acknowledge that successful safety is a collaborative endeavour, and it relies on input from many different professions and trades, including architects and other building designers, surveyors, a range of contractors, engineers from allied disciplines, building managers, facilities managers, and even end users. What's important, though, is that each actor in the fire safety space understands the contribution that they make, where they fit, the limits of their remit and their competence, and how to ensure effective interfaces with others. We've had some great examples of this collaborative professional working, and to echo Gary's, I'm really impressed with the collaboration shown by our institutions, by our members, our volunteers in all this competence group activity, standards development. Tremendous effort has been made and continues to be made. But in terms of some tangible examples, I think the established external wall appraisal process fully acknowledges the different but vitally important roles that are played by both building surveyors and fire engineers working together to the correct conclusion. And we at the institution have been delighted to be working with RIBA in developing the Plan of Work Building Safety Overlay, which fully sets out when fire safety input is needed in projects from the earliest feasibility stages right through design, construction, commissioning, and even occupation. So clearly there's more to be done, but I'd like feeling quite optimistic. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, there's a lot there, and we've got some questions rolling in here as well. I'd just like to, again, rather than ask my own questions, go straight to one of them before we open questions up properly, which is just this. It might be something that you'll comment on, Gary. We've done a lot in the UK, but what are the useful lessons we might learn from other countries and their actions? Now, I'd like to link that to another point, which is, were at the time of the disaster at Grenfell, were other countries building regulations generally better? I mean, we can't be specific and go through them all, but generally better, or not so good in the way they were organised? And the key that's behind that question is whether they are mandatory and output based, such as our guidance notes that we have with the ADBs. We've got guidance notes as opposed to statutory obligations, and very little said about fire in the building regulations itself. So can we just look at, just comparing, for example, America and the UK? Has anybody got experience of those two?
Yeah, do you want me to come in there? So
Yeah.
many of the members of the International Fire Safety Standards Coalition are from the USA, actually. So you've got the International Codes Council, you've got NFPA, SFPE, and others. The difficulty in the USA, because it's a federalized country, is that each of the individual states, whilst they may use the codes, it's not necessarily mandated. Some it is and some it isn't. So you can actually have quite a difference between, say, for example, New York or Los Angeles, and that does cause it is a cause for concern, I know, within the USA itself. A lot of it is really, really good guidance. Some of it is quite prescriptive guidance, the NFPA, for example, issue, and they do have the advantage to update their codes as soon as there's a tragedy. So, for example, we've had a number of fires since the Grenfell Tower fire, so they can update them straight away. But it's not necessarily mandated. It depends on the state or even the city.
I'm grateful to you for reminding me. The word I was searching for in that introduction was, in fact, prescriptive codes, because many listening will have careers that go back before the introduction of the new building regulations with its guidance notes, which came in, I think, in '85, the New Building Act. But before then, we had very strict regulations, comparatively speaking. And certainly in London, we were operating under the London Building Act, the London Constructional Bylaws, and the district surveyor system. And there was a lot more authority built into that system. I mean, I remember as a young architect being pretty fearful of the district surveyor. They had a lot of power. That was before, of course, we broke into private building inspectors as well. Jane, a perspective on all of that from your point of view?
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I'm obviously over the same sort of generation who remembers the district surveyors, and taking one's designs in to have them checked over by somebody who was absolutely terrifying, to be honest. And you were not allowed to go ahead until you'd actually had your plans looked at, and we knew exactly what we were supposed to do because the regulations were much simpler and very prescriptive. My concern now is that we have regulations which, well, certainly on fire safety, they've been tweaked, but they're basically out of date. I don't think there's been a sensible look at the building regulations since 2005 in terms of fire safety. These urgently needed to be done, really after Lacknell House. But here we are 2022. We are being told that the regulations are going to be addressed. But I think it's much easier for the entire industry, not just architects who have to look through so many pieces of legislation and standards and codes of practice with their other advisors. We need to understand the regulations because they're simple. We need to have, you can do this, you can't do that, now work with it and then discuss. It's much easier than saying, well, we have absolutely no idea whether a specific scheme is going to work. Let's call in a fire engineer nice and early. We need to have a really good discussion with our fire engineers. We need to have knowledge of where we're going with a design. We've got to go through planning stage, gateway 1, understanding fire safety. So we need a lot of training. Particularly, I think, architects who come in very early in the process, we need to start, as we have learned to do with sustainability, with how you place the building, and what you do and what you need to know before you start putting the virtual pen to paper.
Let's bring Peter in there, because Peter, I see from the biography, teaches or is heavily involved with Loughborough University, helping to inject fire safety know-how into architecture student curricula. This takes us back, I think, to the previous session, actually, Peter, which is how you imbue with. I mean, if people were to be asked to get on a plane that had been designed and manufactured by the construction industry, I don't think there'd be many takers. You know, if you look at aeroplanes and you look at ships, there's two, very big buildings. One flies, one floats. Their processes are much, much stricter, and I think at the heart of everything they ever do is safety. So, kick us off there. How do you imbue that issue of responsibility into the culture, in your case, of a School of Architecture, but it's got to be the RICS, it's got to be everybody involved in the process of delivering?
Yeah, great question. If I can, I will answer that, Paul. But just if I could, it's very easy to hark back to the good old days. Before the Building Act 1984, when I was 11. So I understood that the move from the very prescriptive-based building regulations with weighty tone pre-1984 to more performance-based code allowed architectural freedom. They were welcomed by architects because you could design more innovative buildings, you could introduce more novel materials when they become established into the design process. But it's almost because that a performance-based system relies on the people with the correct skills and competence being involved at every stage of the design process. That's perhaps where it's fallen down, and we've got this.
But you're bang on the money. I'm interrupting you. I know I'm interrupting you, but you're bang on the money. The intention or the excuse for it, whichever you wouldn't like to say, but was to allow more innovation. We were going to have more innovation. But if you're going to have innovation, you've got to have testing, you've got to have time, you've got to have
absolutely
very sober people who have been properly trained in Jane's language, collaborating with those that know what needs to be inputted into that process. You've got to have time to develop prototypes, to test them. So take us a bit further down there, and then maybe Gary will chip in on that. Because
I completely
is the enemy
agree.
of us.
Sure.
Okay.
And I think something that's become quite clear to me is that the definition of competence has expanded. The competence isn't just about having your fundamental knowledge and coupling that with your experience. Competence now includes behaviours. It includes professional behaviours. So you're quite right. Everybody in this space has to understand the limits of what they know and know where to find proper advice at the right time. And these are the kind of principles that we're trying to inject within our architecture program as well. It's quite a novel concept when we're trying to inspire young architectural students to think big and think creatively. And then boring old fire engineer comes along and tells them about rigid engineering things. But it's that blend that's really important to get in at the earlier stages of the building designer's career.
Well, let's use that as a platform then to move into another part of this subject. Jane talked about the importance of collaboration. Gary said that I think that there's good indications of effort and collaboration, but at the end of the day, picking up on Jane's earlier comment, I wrote it down, there are still adversarial ongoings. I think that's what she said. And within that is a big question. And I took that to mean we have a good degree of friction in the process of developing a design, somewhere between employers' requirements, tender, novation of team, and contractor getting underway with significant changes. We've got an intense crushing of activity within an ever shorter period of time, and an awful lot of room for friction there. Value engineering comes to the fore of that one. Jane, kick us off on that subject. How are we going to get this collaboration and this respect in a context of very adversarial ongoings where price is being driven through the floor?
Well, this is the culture change that we've been talking about, isn't it? It's how do we all as an industry work together to achieve what we need? And you're quite right, safety is well, it's a human right. There's no way that people should be able or willing or even thinking about cutting costs where that means cutting safety, and that has been the case. Well, it certainly was at Grenfell. The point here is that I think a lot of building projects, and I've worked on some D&B projects with a fantastic relationship with the contractor who's asked for us to be novated, and we have very good discussions and together choose what's going to happen next. But I don't think that happens in all cases. I'm trying to be nice about this and diplomatic. But the truth is that many do not have that trust in each other or respect for each other. I've had discussions, for example, with building contractors who say, to be honest, we don't know why you're being novated. We don't need your input. We know what to do. Sort of, would you take a walk out of that door, really? We really don't need your advice any further. Where we have felt that we really do need to work with people and not just sort of in little tranches, but we need to be involved, as do the people that are going to build this all the way through. The traditional role of the architect on smaller projects, which still carries on, and our practice definitely does some of that work, allows you to take responsibility for what you're producing and take that responsibility working with others who take over different aspects of it, but you're working together to get a very good product at the end and you sign it off. An architect's final certificate is very important and it means a great deal. However, as projects change and as value engineering has turned into massive cost cutting at the expense of supervision, proper professional oversight, proper oversight of materials, subcontractors, and always trying to get to the bottom cost because their clients will be happy. The relationships naturally break down. So I think we have to think, if we're going to take the opportunity, and this is an opportunity, to review the way that we work together, we need, as an industry, to stop this lowest cost being the best cost. We need good value. We don't want lowest cost because it has such an invasive and pervasive effect on the way that we work together.
I agree. I do have to say to you, however, that I have just purchased a new motor car and I was driven heavily on the cost. One looks at these vehicles, there's little to choose between them in terms of their efficiency and performance, but at the end of the day, what's the deal in terms of the cost of the vehicle and the warranty and all those things? And, in a sense, that does drive. But I totally agree with you. We shouldn't be pursuing cost saving at the cost of safety. This brings me to a question that's been given to us by Michele Lucarelli. Is there much in the way of looking at competencies on the construction side? Might we do well to adopt a German-style approach with greater mandatory qualification for operatives and indeed companies? Now, before you bite on that one, let me just throw in responsibility without authority. We can't have people who are being held responsible without the proper authority. And I'm not talking about an individual, I'm talking about the team. They must have authority at the right parts. And I'll just tell you all, and delegates as well, that I was once told, and it's not long ago, 6 or 7 years ago, and it was a large building, cultural building, and the project manager on it said, the further architects are kept from the building site, the better. He didn't want any interference from the architects on the building site. So that goes straight back to Michele Lucarelli's question. Presuming that anyway may happen, what kind of competencies are we looking for from people on building sites? Perhaps Gary, you'll kick us off.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? I think this term value engineering, which Dame Judith Hackett said, has got nothing to do with value and nothing to do with engineering either. It's all about cost cutting. I mean, it was absolutely right. But we're still seeing that culture coming through, and we get a lot of feedback into the RICS actually from individuals who are reporting that cost cutting is still the primary driver. Design and build became almost a dirty word actually a couple of years or so ago, but I think design and build is still here to stay. I don't really see that changing hugely, but what we do need is to make sure there's the competent actors in the installers. And all the work of the competency steering group, for example, across the professionals such as engineers, architects, surveyors, etc., won't make a jot of difference perhaps if the installers are not being supervised in what they're doing. So where we have product substitution, it's still ongoing. We're still seeing that on a daily basis on cases being reported into us, where individuals in a package may be trying to save money and have substituted something. Nobody's spotted it, hasn't been reported. So this emphasis on high-rise buildings, HRBs, is great for those limited number of HRBs that we're actually building in this country. But for the vast majority of the low-rise buildings, what we're seeing is a lot of now still the old culture coming through, where people are not being focused on fire safety because they're not engaged in this discussion. It's all of us in the room now that are involved in this, but the installers often aren't. So you ask your average building contractor about the changes coming in the Building Safety Act, they've got no idea. The big contractors have, they're very well planned for it and they've got set up well. But there's the smaller installers which I really worry about because they're in and out on a price and nobody's really supervising what they're doing. And I think that's where we fall down. We just see so much of this almost on a daily basis now, of product substitution, jobs not being done properly. Just yesterday there was one around flammable combustible insulation being wrapped around HAC vents, etc., and trunking. So this is really important that the installers understand what they've got to do, but what the fire safety and building safety implications are of what they're doing. Thanks.
I think Michael Lucarelli's really tapped a very important point here, which is that buildings are by their nature complicated. I mean, take the cladding off a modern building and just look at what's behind it. Very, very sophisticated products. But I'm afraid that my experience is that those sophisticated products have all too often been installed by people who appear not to have understood how to actually insert or install those products into the building. So again, we're onto the training for the people who inspect, but we're also onto the training for the people that do, because the consultancy team can't inspect everything. What about that territory, Jane? How do we get better on-site monitoring of work performance? And surely it's not from the consultants, it's from properly trained installers.
It is. I think you make a very good point. It is from all parts of the industry, and it is not just various different professionals who may or may not be on site, albeit I'm very, very keen that we have a conversation perhaps about significantly bringing back better supervision. Again, being older, I can remember when the clerk of works was on site pretty much all the time, and you could ask them any question you liked and they knew exactly what was going on. And you need somebody like that to help with these bigger projects on site all the time, monitoring what's happening and working on behalf of the client and in fact on behalf of the entire team. But as far as there's a point here about not just the professional teams, but also the people who are on site need to know what is expected of them. And you can't expect somebody who's literally turning up as a labourer to help somebody else to be able to be totally au fait with building regulation requirements and safety and fixing requirements that meet building regulations. So somebody has to monitor that, and that should be the setup, the management of the building contractor who's taking on the work. But I do have one point here which I think is a worry for me, and that is the lack of experience of quite a lot of younger architects in looking at and understanding what a site inspection actually means to the builder. I wish that many more architects would take time to go and work for a builder on a building site, as I did when I started, and understand how things are being put together, and also understand that if you prepare designs and drawings, that somebody has to interpret them. And it's not just the people on site, it's everybody else who comes in. But if the architect, who perhaps now has to take on a specific role as a principal designer, has to come to site, they really need to be very experienced. And you can't rely on old people like me to take that work on. We need to be training our younger architects to understand what they're looking at.
No doubt about it. Time on site is very good. I even remember on site climbing a tower crane and going out to the end of the boom. No harness, no training. But the world has changed. You can't get onto a building site today. David Brooke has written in. I will just read his question. I'll just read a couple of these questions and then we'll round up. Under D&B, where products are seen as equal and approved, equivalent or similar, who makes that call? The principal contractor, specifier, architect, contract administrator, client? Is this a robust enough route in the new regulatory environment? Well, there's a point. I'll leave that hanging there because we haven't got time to deal with all these, but I wanted to pick up a few of the points. Matthew Locke, cost cutting is not value engineering. He obviously agrees with you totally on that, Gary. And what is going to be done about the integrity and competence of estates managers? Another question. And a third one here. Do you think that having a good old-fashioned clerk of works on site would be valuable? I'm going to just go around the three of you because I'd like to end on an optimistic note. And I know I don't know you, Gary and Peter, but I know that Jane is always wonderfully optimistic. Can you each give us just a pointer to the future which has an element of hope about it? And let's start with you, Gary, but very quickly, please.
I would just say simply in passing that the Decade of Action that we've launched, for example, is that there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's a long journey we're on. We've only really just started it. It seems like a long journey for 5 years after Grenfell, but actually there's still a lot to be done. But actually everybody's working in the right direction. We are improving, albeit slowly, the competence and the design, build and management of buildings. Thank you.
Okay, and Peter?
Well, I think from an optimistic point of view, it's probably worth saying that there are no secrets here. We know how to construct buildings properly. We know how to design them properly. We know how it can be done. The unfortunate thing is doing it properly costs money. So we're always against that battle. But in terms of the professional collaboration, which is the topic of this session, I think by us institutions leading by example, hopefully our members are going to grasp this opportunity and work with us to form proper collaborative teams moving forward.
Well, having you as a specialist fire consultant, of course, is terribly important. And I do know that we, as architects, need the inputs of so many others, structural engineers, facade engineers, acoustics, but for fire consultancy to emerge as a major front-running profession, and people perhaps doing a degree in architecture and then moving into fire consultancy, or a degree in surveying and then into fire consultancy, I think is all very, very good. Jane?
I think we have got a good future. We have an astonishing amount of not just collaboration but goodwill to try and make things better. It needs to include government in that process, and it needs to include our clients in that process. But if we all get together and we've got the same aims, it'll work.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we're bang on time. We've finished there. Thank you very much, all three of you. Very rich and incredibly broad-ranging conversation. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.